How's your production on pasture? Are profits down? Are weight gains down? What are you going to do about it? Do something cost-effective. Do something that will make a difference. To add the first and proven leader in feed-through horn fly control to your cattle rations, ask for it by name, Alticid IGR.
Your land is more than a business. It's a heritage that has been passed down from those who tended it before you, by those who shaped it, changed it, and cared for it. Your land has a legacy, one that you carry on, but also one you build on. At Corteva Agriscience, we are the stewards of a lasting legacy. We have a responsibility to Dow AgroSciences, to maintain the relationships and trust they built, and to build upon those foundations. To help you care for your land, to provide innovations that help you protect the hard work and investment you've poured into it. To help you build a legacy that can be passed on for generations to come. Corteva Agriscience.
Ranching is passed down from generation to generation. Know what else gets passed down? The world's finest ranch and rodeo equipment, manufactured by WW Livestock Systems. Ranchers demand quality, and they have come to depend on WW equipment to fulfill their needs, large or small. We invite you to consider WW, made in America, available coast to coast. WW Livestock Systems, the world's finest since 1945.
Good morning and welcome back to our Expo webinar series. Today we're going to have 5 sessions. This is the first of 5, the only CEU session left. Well, the only one today and the only one left in our series that's a CEU. So this morning's topic is going to be Picolinic acid training with Dr. Clayton. It's going to cover application requirements for the use of the Invora herbicide for brush and weed management on rangeland sites. Before applying this new herbicide, you're going to have to complete this picolinic acid chemistry training, or PAC training, as its acronym is known. Texas pesticide applicators can earn 1 CEU credit for laws and regs also in this session. So you get your PAC training and your CEU credit in laws and regulations. And so this morning, we'd like to proudly welcome Dr. Megan K. Clayton, Assistant Professor and Rangeland Extension, and Extension Range Specialist. I'm having a hard time talking this morning. I got to get warmed up. But Dr. Clayton, we're going to try to throw it over to you now, and let's make sure everything transitions properly. And I think we're live to you now. So I'm going to step out of the way.
Great. Hi, good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for attending today. I'm excited to talk to you about this new chemical, Invora, that was finally labeled for grazing lands just this year. You've probably heard of Invora because it's been available for people to buy in 30-gallon drums. So it has gone out aerially, especially this year. But next year, we're hopeful that it's going to be in smaller containers. But like he said, if you want to apply it, you need this special training. So today we're going to cover all the ins and outs of Invora, and I hope by the end of this presentation, you have a better idea on kind of what you could do with the chemical and how it might fit into your chemical toolbox. Let me share my screen here. All right. So I'm going to turn my video off so that people who do not have really strong internet connections can still follow along. But basically, I just want to talk about specifically the Invora herbicide, but also kind of touch on what is this term picolinic acid? Where did that come from? And what other chemicals are we already using that kind of fall into this picolinic acid category? So this training is required to increase applicator awareness. You need it before you apply the chemical. You also have to have your pesticide applicator CEU. So that's not instead of that, but it's with that in order to apply it. But most importantly, we're providing this training in order to promote stewardship of the chemical. We've had a really long process in order to get this labeled to be put onto grazing lands. And as such, we want to make sure that we keep it for our industry. And so we need everybody as partners to use this chemical properly and maintain the integrity of it for future use. So first I want to touch really quickly on our herbicide options, because we know when we're treating unwanted brush or weeds on our rangelands or pastures, we have a few individual plant treatment methods, being cut stump or stem for our brush species and leaf applications for either small weed encroachment or brush issues. And then from a broadcast standpoint, we of course can put out leaf application on brush or weed species. So when would we do cut stump? Cut stump is a little bit more labor up front because you're removing that entire tree as flat and low to the ground as possible without getting dirt kicked up on that. The advantage, even though you're putting in a little more labor up front, is that it's very effective. You apply your chemical mix to just that cut stump surface and any remaining stem. You could do it any time of year. So in my opinion, that's a huge plus. When you have a little bit of downtime during the winter months, great opportunity to go out and do a little cut stump. I always like to say, invite everybody over for Thanksgiving, and then just after the meal, wow, you have everything ready for them to help you knock out a little cut stump treatment in your pasture and get it cleaned up for the next year. You don't have to look at those skeletons, because we know if we do a leaf or a stem application, we have to leave that tree standing for at least a full year. There's no limitation on the size of the tree, and you need very little chemical mix. So there's a lot of pros to doing cut stump treatments. A stem or a basal application is another great resource, especially for seedling trees or with smooth, small stems with smooth bark. You could do up to a 4, maybe 6-inch tree diameter if you were to cut that off and measure the diameter across the stem. But you do have to leave that skeleton remaining for at least 1 full year. You could also do a stem spray at any time of year, which is a bonus, although we say that it's best to do it during the growing season. And finally, we have our leaf applications, which are extremely popular. Leaf applications are more tricky. You really have to apply your leaf application when that plant is actively growing and translocating its carbohydrates down to that bud zone to actually kill the tree. So you need leaves in good condition. You need them to be a dark, mature color. The soil temperature to be at least 75 degrees so we know the tree is actively growing. And you do not want to spray when that tree is flowering or beaning or putting on new leaf, because we know at those times that tree is putting its effort out and not down to the root to actually kill the tree. We know that chemicals and rates are very specific depending on tree species, and we'll talk a little bit about resources of where you can find this information and look at your options for your different tree problems and figure out what chemical might be best for your situation. So now let's jump right into Invora, what we're here to mainly talk about today. After years of anticipation, and I say this because I've been a range specialist for 10 years, and I believe all 10 years we've been researching this chemical in one facet or another. People knew it as MAT 28, Rejuvera, a lot of different names before we actually had the release of Invora. Why were we looking forward to it? Well, we have long-term control of weesach and mesquite, and anybody that's got weesach on their pastures knows that previously we did not have a dependable leaf application for a broadcast method on weesach, and so this is kind of a breakthrough chemical to have something so reliable for that. Also, it does a lot of IPT or individual plant treatment leaf applications for some very difficult plant species that we previously didn't have a good leaf application recommendation for. Some of those include your Texas mountain laurel, whitebrush, loatbush, coyote, agarita, Texas persimmon, and yaupon. Stem and cut stump treatments can be done in water with Invora with a really good MSO. And then you can do residue control of many broadleaf weeds. So it's a very dynamic kind of chemical that can do a lot of different things. And we're excited to have it on the market, especially for some of these species that we have listed here, where we didn't really have another chemical that fit that niche. So here's just a little bit of data, and don't worry, I'm not inundating you with data today, but I did want to show you what I was talking about with that long-term control. These are weesach studies. There were 5 trials that went out that the data is summarized here. This is 3 years after initial treatment. They went back and the other used treatments that we previously were doing on weesach had grown and had a canopy cover of about 30% in that pasture, whereas with Invora, it was still at 2.5%. We have longer term control data information on honey mesquite. That's where we sort of started out testing this product. After 8.5 years across 10 different trials, you can see that under the other traditionally used treatments, we had about a 25% canopy cover, whereas with Invora, only a 2% cover. So I've seen a lot of these sites myself, and it's fairly impressive the amount of time or longevity that you can get out of these applications, which is very helpful because you're not having to pay for that application every single year or every other year as follow-ups to catch all of those you didn't get or the new seedlings that are coming up quite quickly, especially with weesach, one of those species that can grow very quickly if we get any moisture in the ground. So here's the details on Invora. It's actually 2 different ingredients. We have aminocyclopyrrolachlor, or known as ACP. That's the main ingredient, but it's mixed with triclopyramine. So that's, for instance, we talk about Remedy Ultra a lot. That's a triclopyr ester. And in this case, they've added an amine, which is a little bit safer sometimes on chemical application so it doesn't move to other plants, less chance of that happening, but still, of course, it's a chemical, so we have to learn, and we'll learn in this presentation how to be safe with it. The EPA actually issued the grazing label earlier in 2020, so it's kind of one of those rare things that has gone really well in 2020, but it is a restricted herbicide, and they also put on this extra need to have the picolinic acid training. Some of you are probably kind of familiar with that in the farming world because they did that with dicamba. But anyway, you need this 1 hour training every 2 years that we're doing right now. The TDA approved the Texas registration, and this year it has been available in larger container sizes. So I know you can get 30-gallon drums. I've seen it go out by air. So a lot of times the people purchasing these 30-gallon drums either have very large acreages or they're aerial applicators. But next year it's expected or hopeful that there's going to be containers that are smaller that people can use for even individual plant treatment applications. So this is the required picolinic acid training. You'll need it every 2 years in addition to your pesticide applicators license in order to apply this chemical. The training is completed through a state authorized provider such as Texas A&M Extension, which I am right here, or through the registrant or the registrant approved provider, which is Bayer. If you'd like to point some of your landowner friends to the training, there is an online training available at agrolifelearn.tamu.edu. Now, you as a certified applicator need to keep record of your training. You'll be receiving a certificate from us with the date, provider, and the proof for 3 years. And those records need to be made available to the state pesticide regulatory officials and EPA upon request. So what the heck is picolinic acid chemistries? This is actually not a new thing at all for our industry. It's a subfamily of growth regulator herbicides that includes things like Sendero and Tordon and Surmount, Mesoview, Grazon Next, Chaparral, Grazon P plus D. A lot of things, Remedy Ultra, things that we have already been using are considered picolinic acid chemistries. So I know you're all thinking then, why do we need this extra training for aminocyclopyrrolachlor or Invora? Well, because the EPA has regulated that, and they want to make sure that it has a good environmental use and that we are being very careful about what we're releasing into the ag industry, and that those who are applying it are knowledgeable about the effects that this chemical could have if it was applied improperly or on the wrong place. So here's a little intro. Most picolinic acid herbicides are active, of course, on woody herbaceous plant species. So that is why we want it to treat things like huisach and mesquite. They have relatively long soil residual activity, and this is probably why we're seeing such great control and the longevity in a lot of our data. They're highly active even at trace concentrations on non-target plants. For instance, if you took the fecal material or the cow poop off of your pasture and you put it on your garden, you would instantly kill your wife's garden. So I don't suggest doing that. You can't put it on crops or trees or shrubs that you are desiring on your place. Also, it's going to exhibit residual activity in vegetation. So even after desiccation, some of this chemical will remain for a period of time in that plant. And we're going to talk about how you can mitigate that when you use it on your property. Not much unlike many of the other chemicals that are already out. We're just bringing a lot of attention to that right now. And it's going to exhibit persistent activity in livestock manure and urine. So again, we have to be very careful about how we treat any of the manure that comes off that property. In fact, you can't take it off that property. So they could pose compost contamination concerns. So composting awareness, I don't know if you knew this because I did not previous to seeing a map similar to this, that composting, there are many facilities even within Texas, if you can see all those little dots on our state down there. So there is a large industry, and we want to make sure that the fecal material or the vegetation material that comes off of these properties is not coming from some that are treated with these picolinic acid chemistries. So we would like for people to be aware that there is a composting industry, there is a reason for concern, and that there are regulations you're going to have to follow if you use Invora to control some of your unwanted plants. So the flow from the field to compost is probably very known to all of you, but we have to make sure that as most picolinic acid herbicide labels restrict, the same will be with Invora, where we have to be careful with the vegetation and the manure or urine of livestock that have recently fed on those fields. So for Invora, we're going to go through specific time periods of restrictions and what that would mean for you. So you can use Invora on privately owned, non-hayed rangelands and grasslands. So if you have part of your property that you hay, you will not be able to apply Invora on that property or drift onto that property with Invora, because that will limit your ability to hay it. So that's one thing to be very clear on. It also cannot go on any public lands. So anything owned by Texas Parks and Wildlife or that would be considered public, Invora cannot be applied there. There could be no movement of harvest, compost, manure, or vegetation for 2 years following treatment. So that is the reason you cannot put it on hayed lands. You cannot move the vegetation off of there. You cannot move any manure off of there, and that's for a period of 2 years. Grazing livestock have a 3-day clean out. This isn't really unusual. A lot of other chemicals have at least an 18-month clean out time, but what you would want to do is treat some pastures, leave some pastures, or have some pens where you can move your livestock for 3 days prior to taking them off of the property to either sell or go to another location. So they just need to know you can move them within your property, but you cannot move them off the property until you've done the 3-day clean out. Now, before slaughter, there's also a 3-day clean out during the first 12 months. So it's less of a time period, but you still have that clean out to consider. You have to allow brush to degrade on site, so you will not be able to remove brush. You won't be able to use that brush for a campfire. You need to leave it on site. It is full of chemical, and there's no regulation that's going to stop for the brush. But as we know, and as I really remember every year when I go out and do post evaluations where we have sprayed chemicals 2 years prior, a lot of the brush that we have in our areas breaks down quite quickly. So there's a good chance that it's going to start to degrade even before your 2 years is up. And then if you lease property, you can still apply Invora. So don't let anybody tell you otherwise, but you need to have at least 2 years remaining on your lease so that you can follow all of these regulations. And you have to notify your landowner that you're applying Invora and what restrictions come with that. So that's totally clear to everyone who will be using the property. So here's kind of what the schematic, and we're going to go through this as a review later on, looks like, but all of this is very clearly put on the label. And so if you have any doubt, be sure to check your label, because the label's law in the end. There is some additional information about buffers that I want to clarify. And at first it seems really confusing, but quite honestly, it's pretty straightforward. If you have property lines that are external, like you share them with a neighbor, you have free flowing water or water not flowing, but it's shared with a neighbor, so it's not completely contained on your property, then you need to leave a 100-foot buffer for any aerial or ground broadcast that you do. Pretty simple. Now, that does not mean you cannot do individual plant treatments on your fence line. Now, of course, you probably want to coordinate with your neighbor if you're planning to annihilate all the brush in the fence, so you'll kind of be spraying over the fence line. Coordinate with them, but you are allowed to do individual plant treatments up to the fence. Just with the aerial and broadcast, you have to be careful that you're not applying within 100 feet, because that application will not be shared knowledge with those who will also be utilizing that free-flowing water. The water is not flowing or totally on your treatment site, then you can actually spray broadcast up to the water's edge. So if you completely own that piece of water, then, or if that's an internal fence line, you can spray all the way up to the edge. So here's some additional no's. You don't want to drift into water. So even if you're allowed to spray up to the water's edge, you can't allow that to get into the water. You can't allow this chemical to get in the root zone or directly to desirable vegetation that you didn't intend to kill, because it will likely kill it. And then there's no movement off site. So you have to make sure that you apply it under all the restrictions that are on the chemical label, just like any chemical, to make sure it stays on site. So here's some examples of some of the other chemicals that we're very familiar with, some of their trade names that you've probably used before. And then over here on the right-hand side, here's the downward adjustment, or the feet that you have to come off of sensitive structures, water, or non-target species. So this isn't a new thing. I mean, Mesovu has a 50-foot, Sendero has a 50-foot. We're talking about at least 100 feet for Invora. Some of these other ones like 2,4-D products have a 250-foot regulation. So whether you are aware of it or not, all of these chemicals have a lot of the same regulations. You just need to make sure that you're reading your label and following that. So again, here's the diagram. We're going to kind of do a review by going through all of these different sections. Remember, apply in place and leave in place. So you have that 2-year time frame to think about. So first of all, non-hayed rangelands. Make sure that you heard me correctly. This can't go on any rangeland that is hayed, because you will not be able to take the hay off that property. You'll only be able to graze it. And so you're really limiting yourself if you drift onto areas that were hayed. You can apply this on any private land, not on public land. And we'll go over this again, but the states that this is labeled for currently are only Arizona, New Mexico, Oklahoma, and Texas. So if you do any work outside of Texas, know that those 3 surrounding states also have a label for Invora. If you have a lease, again, you do have to notify your landowner. Make sure that they're aware of what you're putting out and that you have these restrictions, but you have to have 2 years remaining in your lease. Possibly, if you do not, you might be able to renegotiate with them to get a new contract put together that puts you out 2 years in the future. Also, remember that you can't apply to hay and you cannot remove that herbaceous vegetation for 2 years. We already went over that. There are no grazing restrictions for livestock, although there is that 3-day clean out before you take them to slaughter for 12 months or before you move them off property for 24 months. Also, you cannot take brush off the site ever, so it's going to degrade right there on site. We already covered this. You have to do the livestock clean out before you move them. So the best way to stage this, if you don't want to have to feed your livestock for 3 days, is simply to only treat a portion of your property at a time and allow that 2 years to go by to where you have other areas on your property that you could move them to. And then of course you cannot take the manure off site. I really don't know a lot of people who remove manure, but the case where we might see some of this is if people have smaller places, maybe they just have show cattle, then you want to be very aware that that manure is not something that you can remove or that you would want to use in any way in any other area, because it could affect the vegetation that you put it on. All right, so remember, apply in place and leave in place. So the reason for the restricted use on this pesticide is because of the potential impact on non-target desirable vegetation like trees and crops. So that's why we have to be very specific that we're applying this with those buffers in mind on private rangeland that is not hayed. There is a potential to non-target desirable vegetation. Some of those that are listed specifically on the label include conifers, which we don't have a whole lot of, deciduous trees, which includes Chinese tallow, which I don't think many of you would be sad about. It could also hurt cottonwoods. It'll hurt honey locusts, which some of you, again, might not be too sad about, redbud and willow species, and also many ornamental shrubs. So be sure that you're applying it according to the label and that you don't get it on any desirable species. Also, like it's underlined right there, please note that the tree root zone may extend well beyond their drip lines. So you want to make sure that you're not spraying up to another canopy of a tree that you don't want to kill, because there may be a chance that that root zone, or there should be likely that that root zone is going to be outside of that canopy cover. Also know that broadleaf crops or trees or annually planted crops like your wheat and barleys are Invora herbicide sensitive, and so you're going to have to stay away from those areas where they're planted. So I want to cover real quickly one of our resource guides that kind of summarizes a lot of the data that we have behind chemical applications on weed and brush species for rangelands. So it's called our reference guide. If there's enough data collected to run past our herbicide use committee, then it's put into this booklet so that it's free knowledge for all to know what herbicides have been tried, the effectiveness level of those herbicides, and when you should apply it. This is a data repository. Again, it goes through our herbicide use committee at Texas A&M. It's now updated electronically, so we can update it more frequently as data is submitted to the herbicide use committee. It's used as the USDA technical guide, which means if you get into any program such as EQIP, NRCS is going to use this guide to determine what practices they can fund with federal monies or cost share with federal monies. It's available at our agrilifebookstore.org, or you can download the updated PDF directly from my South Texas Rangelands.tamu.edu website. And there's a little tab called Publications. If you click on that, it'll be under the chemical section or the herbicide section as a download, again, straight as a PDF. So here's what the guide kind of looks like. Everything is listed by herbicide common name, which is like the active ingredient that's in our herbicides. That's not how we typically talk about herbicides, such as Picolinic is Tordon 22K. We usually talk about Tordon, not Picolinic. And you can see that aminocyclopyrrolachlor is right here. And it shows that it's sold as method, but that is going to be updated, or it was updated, so as you can see Invora on here as well. So there's the herbicide common name, the product name that you're probably familiar with. And what's important is that it lists the active ingredient or the acid equivalent. And so that's what you're going to be looking at if you buy anything other than the normal trade name. So for instance, Picolinic Tordon is a 2 pound per gallon acid equivalent. And here's straight off the label, Picolinic acid, 2 pounds per gallon. So that's where we're getting that. That is the acid equivalent. So if you wanted to go purchase one of the other Picolinics that's a generic, you're just going to want to make sure that it's the same strength, basically, or the same concentration as Tordon 22K. So make sure that it's a Picolinic and it provides at least 2 pounds per gallon. Within our book, our data repository, we have ratings by each one, and they're just listed as VH for very high, H for high, M for moderate, or L for low. And these indications are just saying how much percent of plant kill you might expect when applied under the right conditions for that chemical in that plant. So it kind of gives you a gauge of how effective that chemical is, because just because it's in the book doesn't mean that we're saying this is our recommendation to you. It might be in there to say, hey, if you're applying Grazon Next on weeds, you can expect low control on Weesatch because it's a suppression chemical. But it's good to know like what kind of range you might get according to what you're spraying. So here is a list on one page of all the weed species and all the brush species that we currently have in the book. Just because it's not in our recommendation or our reference guide does not mean that a chemical will not work on that plant. It just means that we haven't done enough research and collected enough data to get it into the reference book. But you'll see that each plant, like African rue right here, is on page 7. For our example today, we're going to look at mesquite and see it is listed a lot because we've done a lot of research on mesquite. And so it's on several pages in this booklet, but we're going to focus primarily on aminocyclopyrrolachlor or Invora because that's what we're talking today in mesquite. So you'll see it's listed right here, mesquite as a basal stem application with a diameter of less than or equal to 4 inches. You can put out aminocyclopyrrolachlor triclopiramine, which we know from that previous chart is Invora. Over here it says that it has very high control when used at a 15% rate in water with a 1% rate of MSOOS, that's methylated seed oil organosilicone surfactant. I'm not going to say that again. So know when I refer to MSOOS, I'm referring to that name. It tells you right here the spray volume, how to apply it, when to apply it over here in the next column. any extra remarks about it. And then here it reminds you that in order to apply this, you need to have that specific picolinic acid chemistry training, which we're doing right now, before use. So that's kind of the rundown on how you're going to see it listed in the booklet. Here's another example on mesquite for cut stumps. We have aminocyclopyrrochlor trichlopyramine, or Invora, listed at a very high control when used at 8 to 10%. I usually use 10% in water plus the 1% MSOS. And again, it tells you how to do it, when to do it, and any extra remarks. Down here, you're going to find it listed as the leaf application. You could do that broadcasted with 24 to 36 fluid ounces per acre of Invora, and it will give you a very high control. You also get a very high control with individual plant treatments at 1.5%. Again, it'll tell you how to apply it, when to apply it, and any extra remarks. And again, that's going to be available at my website, and I'll give you that at the end of the presentation. All right, so the application with Invora, we kind of went over some of this. Depending on the plant species that we looked at, we used mesquite as our example, but for instance, Weesach might be putting out the higher rate of Invora. And you can also do spot spray or individual applications. Remember, there was that whole list of new plant species, new brush species that we have individual plant recommendations for, like Yopon or Texas persimmon, that could also be controlled with IPT. You can also do the cut stump and the basal stem spray, but make sure you recognize that those are done in water, which is very different than our remedy and diesel applications that we're used to doing. But you will need to add in that MSO-OS as an adjuvant. And of course, there's maximum use rates. And the maximum use rate for Invora is 48 ounces per acre for a single application. And over a year, if you have 2 applications that are spread out at least 2 weeks, you can use up to 54. So the number to really remember is that 48 fluid ounces per acre. You never want to go over that. All right, so if you were to calculate this, I'm going to do this very quickly. As an example, if you want to mix up 1 gallon of that 15% spray solution to do a basal stem application of Invora, you're going to mix that with 1% adjuvant, which is our MSO-OS. So you know that 1 gallon is 128 fluid ounces. That's really the only number you have to memorize, 128 ounces in a gallon. And then you're going to times that by 15 and then divide by 100. And that will tell you how many fluid ounces. So you do 128 times 15 divided by 100. And that'll tell you how many fluid ounces of Invora to put in your 1 gallon of mix. So in this case, it is 19.2 fluid ounces. And then you'll add in your MSO-OS at 1%. So you'll do 128 times 1, divide that by 100, and that'll tell you how many fluid ounces of MSO-OS to add in. And of course, the rest will be water in this case. So again, all you have to know is that 1 gallon is 128 fluid ounces. When you do individual plant treatment, we also always recommend that you put in a blue dye just as a marker, and you only need that at 0.5% at the most. And so that's going to be like 0.6 fluid ounces of blue dye. So remember, when we apply chemicals, any chemical, we want to avoid temperature inversions. That's simply when you have like a layer of cold air trapped below a layer of warmer air. And I don't know about your area, but man, around Corpus Christi lately, we've had a lot of really foggy mornings. As our temperatures are kind of changing, we tend to get that cool air during the night and our warmer air coming in. It's very foggy. It indicates poor vertical air mixing, and there's light to no wind typically, which is not ideal for spraying. What we're looking for is vertical air mixing, like in this top picture. We want a little wind. You know, spraying herbicide, people always say, I'm looking for a no wind day. That's kind of a misnomer, because we're actually looking for a little bit of wind, because that helps to direct that chemical onto the target plant species, so that it will get good coverage and kill the plant, and also so we don't have a lot of issues with our chemical moving off target. So we're really looking for somewhere between 2 and 10 miles per hour for our winds. avoiding those gusty conditions because that's hard to get consistent application on. And again, avoid the windless conditions as well. So here's why we're concerned about wind. So the effect on our droplet size is very, very different if we're talking about, sorry, we're looking at physical drift and the effect of our droplet size over the fall of 10 feet. So if we have a 10-mile-per-hour wind, the time for the droplet to hit the ground, depending on the droplet size, is going to vary greatly. So if it's a 10 micron droplet size, which is fairly small, it could be 17 minutes. If you have 1,000 micron droplet, it's going to be 1 second. So droplet size does matter quite a bit. When we're looking at droplet size specifications and what we're hoping for you to put out, the label for Invora will state that you want to use coarse to very coarse droplets, which kind of translates into 350 to 500 microns. If you're thinking, man, I've never paid attention to my droplet size, I really strongly encourage you to. First of all, when you hire out, you always want to ask people what size droplets they're putting out. And at the very least, they'll be able to look up their nozzle configuration and tell you what coarse to very coarse, medium, fine, what size droplet they're doing. And that will give you an indication of the type of microns that are going out. We want a small enough droplet size to where we get good coverage over the plant. On these leaf applications, it's very necessary that on a resprouting brush species, we cover all of those leaves so the plant doesn't regrow from some of the buds below the soil surface. But when we're talking about using a larger droplet size, then we could fall through and not get too much. Now, if we go on the other end and get too small of a droplet size, we know that that's going to have a high potential of drift, so we don't want to do that. When we put it out, we're doing 4 to 10 gallons per acre for aerial or 10 to 20 gallons per acre for broadcast equipment. We're doing drift retardants. You have to follow the label directions and make sure that your droplet size does meet the above specifications. And then your tank mix partners, care should be taken to make sure that if you add something in, such as an ester formulation, you're aware that that changes the volatility to be more volatile of your herbicide that you're taking out than Invora alone. You'll notice on the label, and this is something I want to point out because it's a little bit different than some of our other treatment applications. We do it's suggested on the label that you do broadcast applications on brush using an MSO-OS. That's different than just using a non-ionic surfactant like we use with a lot of other chemicals. Also, broadcast applications on herbaceous or non-woody vegetation suggests using either an MSO-OS or a non-ionic surfactant with at least an 80% active. And IPT applications could also be either the MSO-OS or the non-ionic surfactant. When we do the cut, stump, or stem applications in water, you're going to use that 1% MSO-OS. So for the most part, broadcast applications and cut, stump, or stem must be with the MSO-OS. Anything else, it's suggested that you use MSO-OS, but you could get away with the NIS. So again, you need proper protective equipment in order to apply. This chemical actually has a danger signal word, which indicates an eye hazard. It can cause irreversible eye damage, so you want to make sure that you definitely take care. You don't get it in your eyes or on your clothing. We want to make sure that you're wearing a long sleeve shirt and long pants, shoes plus socks, and protective eyewear, of course. A lot of times people ask me, can I just wear my sunglasses? Yes, you can, but you need to be very careful. And if you think that it's windy and it might get past your sunglasses, it would be best to use something more like goggles or safety glasses that have a rim on them to protect your eyes. Be sure with all chemicals, you always wash your clothes separate in detergent and hot water. That way you get all that chemical out and you're not spreading that onto or possibly contaminating other laundry. Invora spray solution should be applied within 24 hours of mixing. This is another very important thing to note because you can get away with some herbicides mixing it up and using it for days at a time. but Invora is very specific and you must use that within 24 hours or your product will start to degrade. So you might notice that as you move across a pasture, your kill is less and less and less, and that's actually because the solution is breaking down. Again, there's no grazing restrictions, but it might be a good idea to allow plants to recover before grazing them heavily if that pasture has had a really thick brush coverage and not able to grow much vegetation. And I want to point out again that this herbicide is labeled for 4 states right now: Texas, Arizona, New Mexico, and Oklahoma. And I want to point out that on my website, where you'll find that reference guide, you'll also find this quick reference for range and pasture chemicals. It's a really handy guide that gives you all of our chemicals, the trade name that you buy them for, grazing restrictions, hay restrictions, rainfall interval, or as in how long after you apply the chemical do you not have to have a rain in order for it to be effective. And then if you need a pesticide applicator license to apply that, you'll notice that Invora right here has a little number 7 by it, and on the second page it'll tell you that you also need this picolinic acid chemistry training in order to apply it. All right, so it looks like we have a few more minutes, and I want to go through just a few quizzes. Do y'all have access to your chat box? Can everybody pull up their chat box for me? I'm going to go through, just for fun, a few quizzes just to review some of the information, because I gave you a lot of things to consider today and to remember. But remember, in the end, if there's a question, consult the label because it tells you very specifically. You'll see that same cartoony description outlining every single factor that I went through today. So your question number 1 is, Invora herbicide is labeled for which of the following privately owned use sites? So you can just type in the letter there to select your answer. Is it non-hayed rangelands, non-hayed perennial grassland managed for seed production, non-hayed perennial grassland managed as rangeland, grass hay production fields, or all of the above? Where can you apply herbicide, the Invora herbicide? Oh, chat box doesn't work. That's a bummer. Okay. So you would have to put that in the question and answer box, which might get quite crazy. But I see someone selected C. And you're right, it's A and C, because we can apply this on any non-hayed rangeland, and we can also apply it on non-hayed perennial grassland managed as rangeland. So thanks for putting those in. It's actually kind of a trick question because it says select all that apply. It's A and C. We know that we cannot put it on something that's managed for seed production or for hay. So we want to avoid those situations. Okay, number 2. Broadcast applications of Invora herbicide require a 100-foot buffer to which of the following? A river, a lake not wholly located on the treatment site, outer bank of an irrigation canal, or a property line, like an external property line, or all of the above? Yes, absolutely. Y'all are great. Okay. All of the above. You can apply that, or you require a 100-foot buffer for all of those situations because that water is not completely contained on your property, or you share the adjoining property. Okay, let's do a couple more. Question 3, this is a scenario. So you own this section of land, which is 640 acres. You want to spray herbicide on this green area on the honey mesquite. You have 80 acres of a Bermuda grass field up here. Obviously, you can still apply Invora, but you have the wind direction going 10 miles per hour in the direction of your Bermuda grass field. Is it okay to go ahead and apply it because the Bermuda grass hayfield is owned and managed by the same landowner? Or is the Bermuda grass, the Bermuda grass is tolerant to the treatment? An untreated buffer should be left around. Oh, I read that wrong, sorry. Although the Bermuda grass hayfield is owned and managed by the landowner and Bermuda grass is tolerant to the treatment, an untreated buffer should be left around the hay production field. True or false? Do you have to? If you own the land, Yeah, true. Good. Thank y'all. It's true. So you have to definitely follow the label directions, even if you own that Bermuda grass. If you did spray onto that Bermuda grass field, you didn't leave that buffer, you would not be able to hay that field and take the hay off site. So you'd really be shooting yourself in the foot to apply that incorrectly. Number 4, last one, and then I'll address any questions that are in the chat box or in the question and answer box. Invora herbicide is a member of the picolinic acid herbicide family. Characteristics of most products in this family, including Invora, are active on broadleaf vegetation, soil residual activity, potential to drift, and compost contamination concerns from treated vegetation or resulting manure. Or is it E, all of the above? Ah, yeah, that one's easy, right? Okay, E, all of the above. As a picolinic acid, we're concerned about all 4 of those things related to this herbicide, which is the reason for this training and added training to help you understand the herbicide a little bit better and hopefully get you excited about applying it if the situation is right next year. All right, I'm going to move down to my final slide. Whoa, too fast. All right, so this is my information, the website where you could get the publications that I referenced is southtexasrangelands.tamu.edu. And there is a little publications tab if you move over onto the right-hand side that says publication, and it will have those listed with quite a few others. All of our Weed Buster and our Brush Busters publications are available on there as well. And if you're on Facebook, you could join us on Texas Range Extension. We have maybe a couple of posts a week, not a lot, but it'll make you aware of any webinar opportunities coming up and any new changes to herbicides, and hopefully we'll be able to release that Invora is now available in smaller containers next year. We've got our fingers crossed. And if you have any questions, of course, you could always email me at megan.clayton@ag.tamu.edu. Now, if we have any questions, maybe I could address those.
Chat box, did you address those ones?
I didn't see anything in the chat box. I'm thinking maybe they don't have access to that, but there is a question and answer box. I got a few questions here.
It was in the Q&A. I'm sorry. I got a habit of calling it a chat box.
Well, I'm used to it too. I told everybody to type into there. Is Invora effective IPT on greenbrier's foliar application? So I don't have that data in front of me, but I believe yes, there's been some good activity on greenbrier. I know from the very beginning, a lot of work was done on greenbrier, and ACP or aminocyclopyrrolachlor was active ingredient on that. So that would be a great application for it, and could even get some of the other potential brush species that are in that line as well. That would be ideal. Looking here. Where is Invora available? Great question, Phil. Invora is right now available mostly through your aerial applicators. If you'd like to purchase a 30-gallon drum, you could go to that invora.com and put in a request, and they could get you information on where you could purchase the 30-gallon drum. But again, we're hoping to have that in smaller containers and more widely available next year. Tracy asked, can you burn the brush? Yes, you can burn the brush because you're leaving it in place. You just can't remove the brush from site. I hope that makes sense. You would want to not necessarily with any chemical really, take the brush that you've applied chemical to and use that like in a campfire to cook your food over. But you can burn the brush if you were doing, say, a prescribed burn on that acreage, sure. Is there a haying restriction for IPT application in an adjacent pasture? There is not a haying restriction because you're absolutely not allowed to get Invora on the hay pasture. So if you're spraying that fence line, be sure to keep it right on the fence line and not to apply any on your hay pasture. Is Invora effective IPT on greenbrier? Oh, that was already answered. Okay. Right now, I think I've answered all the questions, but if you have an additional question, feel free to type that in. I'd be happy to get to you. Or if you had a question you wanted to ask me later, please feel free to contact me there at my email address, and I'll get right back to you with an answer.
I do have one question from a retailer standpoint. We
Sure.
about this pack training. Is there a certificate, a separate certificate issued for that? Will they have to take that to a retailer and show that when they purchase these products, or is private applicator license well enough?
That is a very good question. That was kicked around quite a bit. The way it's written right now, you have to have this pack training to apply the chemical. So to purchase it, you would just need your pesticide applicator's license, but to apply it, you would need the pack training. Good question. All right, I'm not seeing anything else, but I sure appreciate the invite today and had a lot of fun chatting with you about Invora and picolinic acids.
We thank you for doing it today for us, and it was good information for everybody. And I think all the questions are answered. I'm looking on our Q&A, not chat, Q&A screen, and I think we're good. And we didn't have any other questions from the few of us who are here in the room today. So we're going to end this session, and we thank everybody for attending, and we're going to get ready for the next one. So we're going to sign off now.